The Forgotten Cigars, Triple Crown brands that vanished after the Cuban embargo. In February of 1962, a single signature changed the cigar industry forever. Overnight, some of the most prestigious cigar brands in the world, names that wealthy collectors and everyday smokers had trusted for generations, became illegal to sell in the United States. But here is the part most people do not know. It was not just about losing access to Cuban cigars. Dozens of legendary brands that had defined American cigar culture for decades, simply vanished. Not banned, not boycotted, just gone. Erased by a single trade policy that reshaped the entire industry almost overnight. Today we are talking about the so-called Triple Crown brands, the elite tier of pre-embargo cigars that disappeared when the United States severed its tobacco relationship with Cuba, and why most smokers today have never even heard their names. Welcome back to the Forgotten Cigars. Let's get into it. What was the Triple Crown era? Before 1962, the United States was one of the largest markets in the world for premium Cuban cigars, and several brands had built towering reputations as the absolute best of the best, the cigar world's equivalent of a Triple Crown tier of prestige. These were not just popular brands, they were the cigars wealthy businessmen, politicians, and celebrities specifically sought out, often associated with private clubs, high-end hotels, and exclusive tobacco shops in cities like New York, Chicago, and Miami. Many of these brands had decades of history behind them, some dating back to the 1800s, built on direct relationships with specific Cuban tobacco growers and factories that had refined their blends over generations. Distribution for these top-tier brands was often deliberately limited, reinforcing exclusivity and helping maintain extremely high price points compared to mass-market cigars of the era. This pre-embargo period is often remembered by historians and collectors as a golden age of American cigar culture, a time when access to authentic Cuban tobacco was not a luxury reserved for the ultra-wealthy traveling abroad, but a regular part of upscale American life. After the United States imposed its trade embargo on Cuba in February 1962, it did not just restrict cigars, it cut off all commercial trade between the two countries, immediately making it illegal to import Cuban tobacco products into the United States. For brands whose entire identity, blend, and reputation were built around authentic Cuban tobacco, this was an existential crisis. Without access to the leaf that defined their product, these companies faced an impossible choice: shut down, relocate production, or attempt to recreate their blends using tobacco from other countries. Many smaller, ultra-premium brands simply did not have the infrastructure, capital, or business relationships needed to rebuild production elsewhere fast enough to survive. Some had been so tightly tied to specific Cuban factories and growing regions that there was no realistic way to replicate their signature blends using Dominican, Honduran, or Nicaraguan tobacco, at least not without losing the qualities that made them legendary in the first place. Distribution networks built around exclusivity and direct importation from Cuba collapsed overnight, leaving many of these brands with no viable path to reach their existing customer base. For collectors and retailers holding existing inventory, remaining stock became instantly more valuable, but also finite. Once those boxes were sold, there would be no more coming. Why some brands disappeared while others survived. Not every Cuban-linked brand vanished after the embargo. Some had already begun diversifying production into other countries, or had strong enough brand recognition and capital to rebuild using non-Cuban tobacco. However, many of the top-tier Triple Crown brands were specifically built on ultra-premium positioning tied directly to authentic Cuban origin. Their entire value proposition collapsed the moment that authenticity became unavailable in the US market. Some companies attempted to continue under the same name using tobacco from other countries, but loyal customers and collectors often viewed these versions as fundamentally different products, leading to brand confusion, declining sales, and eventual discontinuation. Other brands were owned by smaller, family-run operations without the resources to pivot quickly, relocate manufacturing, or compete with larger companies that successfully transitioned to non-Cuban tobacco sourcing in places like the Dominican Republic, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Some brand names were eventually sold, licensed out, or absorbed into larger tobacco companies. The original blends, factories, and the specific qualities that earned them Triple Crown status were lost in the transition, even if the name technically lived on in a diminished form. Over the following decades, as the market adjusted and new generations of smokers grew up without ever experiencing the original pre-embargo versions, these brands faded from cultural memory almost entirely. What happened to the remaining cigars? For decades after the embargo, original pre-1962 boxes of these elite brands occasionally surfaced in private collections, estate sales, and specialty auctions, often commanding extraordinary prices due to their rarity and historical significance. Collectors and cigar historians treat surviving examples almost like archaeological artifacts, and physical evidence of a version of the cigar industry that no longer exists and can never be recreated, since the original tobacco, factories, and blending techniques are gone. Cigar aficionados who have had the rare opportunity to smoke surviving pre-1962 examples often describe them as a completely different experience from anything available today, a reminder of just how much was lost when these brands disappeared. Because so few records, reviews, and detailed blend notes survive from this era compared to today's heavily documented cigar industry, much of what we know about these vanished brands comes from second-hand accounts, old advertisements, and the memories of those who experienced them firsthand. This combination of scarcity and lost institutional knowledge is part of what makes the Triple Crown era so mysterious. These were not obscure brands to begin with, they were the top of the industry, yet today, most modern smokers have never even heard their names. The story of these vanished brands is a powerful reminder that even the most prestigious, well-established names in any industry are not immune to disappearing when the conditions that created them change. It highlights how deeply political and economic decisions can reshape entire industries overnight. These brands were not discontinued because the cigars got worse or because customers lost interest. They vanished because of a single trade policy decision that cut off their access to the tobacco that defined them. This pattern repeats throughout cigar history. Brands tied too closely to a single source, a single factory, or a single political relationship are often the most vulnerable when circumstances shift. For modern collectors, this is part of what makes pre-embargo cigars so fascinating and valuable. They represent a frozen snapshot of an industry before a major historical turning point, something that can never be reproduced no matter how much money or expertise is applied today. For cigar enthusiasts in general, this story is a reminder that the cigar industry as we know it today was shaped by forces far beyond the tobacco itself. Politics, trade policy, and business decisions have always played just as big a role in determining what cigars survive as quality or craftsmanship ever did. So the next time someone mentions pre-embargo Cuban cigars, remember, we are not just talking about old tobacco. We are talking about an entire tier of legendary brands that defined American cigar culture for generations. These brands were essentially erased overnight by a single piece of trade policy, and most smokers today have never even heard of them. That is the story of the Triple Crown brands, among the truest lost legends in all of cigar history. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit subscribe because every week on the Forgotten Cigars, we dig up another piece of cigar history that has been buried, forgotten, or quietly erased from the story most people know. Drop a comment and let me know, have you ever come across a pre-embargo cigar or heard a story passed down about one of these legendary brands? I would love to hear about it. And if you want to make sure you do not miss the next forgotten legend, ring that notification bell. See you in the next one.